It is my immense pleasure today to be talking to Nataliya Gumenyuk, a prominent Ukrainian journalist specialising in foreign affairs conflict reporting. She's co-founder and CEO of the Public Interest Journalism Lab and a co-founder of the independent media Hromadske. Nataliya is lead journalist of the Reckoning Project, and she is the author of several documentaries and books, including The Lost Island Tales from Occupied Crimea. Gumenyuk regularly writes for The Guardian, The Washington Post, Rolling Stone, Die Welt, and many, many others, including The Atlantic, and also appears on a range of media. Nataliya, it's a deep honour to interview here, and here we are in, I'd say, sunny London, but slightly impending wet London. I think it's about to rain, actually.
It's really, really nice to be here, and in fact we do have now the very same weather in Kiev, where I have come from. These days, at least these days, yeah.
Odessa, as you'd expect, was warm and extremely summery. It was the right kind of weather for Odessa at the Security Forum there. Let's start with The Reckoning, the play, which is on this evening, which I'm also privileged to be able to go and see, but also The Reckoning Project. There's a commonality behind them. What is the purpose and the passion behind these two projects?
So I think what is also pretty phenomenal and thrilling for me being here, in fact, when we were co-founding the Reckoning Project, and it was the very first days of the invasion, we used to work with Peter Pomerantsev, a British writer, researcher, prior to the full-scale invasion with Public Interest Journalism Lab, and I think like a few days right before the full-scale invasion, he was in DC and extremely worried of what we will do, and I was like saying, we'll report. We couldn't imagine what that will happen. And exactly then, I was in Kiev, the war started, I've been reporting. He was in Yale, and there he met Janine Giovanni, whom we both didn't know well before. She's quite a renowned war correspondent with experience in the Middle East, but not in, let's say, in Eastern Europe. And I think there was something that within the first day, he was really like, how are you? What's going on? Like, we need to record these testimonies. We need to work with the, war crimes, because also, our background is in human rights. And we had already this set up organization, Public Interest Journalism Lab, which was like, at that day needed to do, we actually were planning presentation on the story about what's going on in the occupied territories, occupied Donbass. And, Peter's first instinct was we would record those testimonies, and that would be also for movies, because we also documentary filmmakers for, for this kind of future memory, including theater. So in fact, the idea for us, to record testimonies was actually at first about the preserving this memory, and then when we discussed within the next few days that it could be also, for the accountability reason. So what we do, we talk to survivors and the witnesses of the war crimes, and collect their testimonies, creating a kind of database, but initially from the very first stage, because contrary to different projects, the way we designed it, we are not human rights organization, we were not human rights organization, but we really wanted to do what media can do more beyond just telling the story imminently, like news story. So we had this kind of a capable group of the filmmakers, journalists, able to record the stories in a way that they would stay with us. I'm really speaking about that because I'm extremely proud, because at the moment we started it, we couldn't even imagine that there would be those stories, not just on papers, even in some film documentaries, but there would be testimonies out of which the play would be developed. So we started to record them, and my task was also to hire the journalists, to find the relevant people. We developed this methodology of recording these testimonies, build the system, how to preserve it. And I think that the whole time there was an idea that it all should be, so it's collected, and then the very same testimonies are they are translated into English, they are analyzed, and they're summarized in a way that it's easy to read such a amount of data. So they're passed to the lawyers of the Reckoning Project, who can, do some submissions. We also filed one criminal complaint, so far one, but it's a huge thing. And also we passed them to the Ukrainian prosecutors. So it used, in our analysis of what's going on with the war crimes. What are the patterns? What Russia is doing? What is happening to the people in the occupation? But also identifying some possible perpetrators. And again, the idea that it will be also for so-called, as Peter frames it, we are working not just for the courts, but the courts of public opinion. And, so yeah, there we are. We collected over 600 testimonies at this stage. We produce, dozens of articles. We've done maybe 10 documentaries of different scale, some for festivals, some for media companies. They're translated in numerous languages. Our team, the team of researchers and the journalist, is based mainly in Kiev, but there were different people working within all these years. The project is developing. We have various teams working and operating. Yet it's really kind of a special for me because, somebody who is in charge of this whole kind of testimony gathering part, used to be at least at that part, seeing that it happened that this play is really based on the testimonies mainly done within the first months of our project. So, it's something very dear to my heart because it's something where, when it still were less, you kind of knew every story. You remember how the journalist went to that assignment, how the journalist returned from that assignment and said, I recorded that person. So, out of those 600, actually these ones are really the ones, I know well. There are a couple of them which I recorded myself. So it's a really very special, personally for me, a very special moment and time, mainly because partially it's already kind of some part of justice. It's already there. For me, it's we have fulfilled the promise, because what is the thing which bothers me the most, it's really that if people talk to you, it's a bit of your responsibility to do something with that. Of course, a lot of human rights organizations whose work I admire create these databases, but somehow, because it's not we promised to do more. We didn't promise to do more, but we at least said we will give a try to preserve the voice, that it's not just analytical work, it's not just human rights work, that there would be something bigger out of that your voice might be heard, globally. And honestly, within these 3 years of work, sometimes you don't really understand, where is your work heading? Have you accomplished something? If there is no trial, if there is no, end of it, if the perpetrator is not behind the bars, do you think is it all in vain? Why did you talk to these people? And it's a very reassuring. It's very reassuring that we're here in London and there is this play. And I really, I want also to say I watched the show before the press night. I'm uncomfortable audience for the team, obviously, because at that room I was the only person who met some of those people, or also met the people who met those people. I knew more than them. So I was a bit an unusual audience, looking oh, I know this person. I couldn't take any distance. I couldn't look at that as an artwork because it's very real. But what I'm very glad, and honored and humbled, that the play is done in that way, that for an audience, and the audience which has nothing to do with those people, which have never seen those people, have never heard those stories. I heard them, hundreds of times during the editing process, and working with them. It's wow, it's working. It's there is something. There are people who, in this audience, feel a bit what those people went through, and just feel this kind of empathy, feel this, at least understand, because my bar is pretty low on what I expect. I expect at least understanding.
And those stories from the early part of the war, they still resonate, which of course is a good thing, because a huge amount of effort was put into the propagandistic efforts around Bucha, Izium, Irpin and others to try and, we know how Russian propaganda operates, to sort of create doubt about whether these were organic and real. In this country, at least, I don't think that worked, and these names are known now, and this seems to me very important.
I think that what is very special about Ukraine, that the Russian impunity, that's what is driving the Kremlin troops. They could do and committed a lot of atrocities in Chechnya. They facilitated a lot of war crimes in Syria. But it was not in the plain sight. And I think that they came to Ukraine operating in the very same mode, coming to the area where they didn't understand that we are there. And those territories, for instance, partially were liberated. And it's our country. There was access for the free media, access for Ukrainian media, for foreign media, for internationals. And somehow they were acting as if nobody would see, and then they would cover it up. Actually, they're trying to do the same still in the occupied territories. Yet still we try to, it's our country. We are there. We have the press. We have access. We are not in Syria. We are not in North Korea. And they're operating as if they are. So we didn't allow them to erase it all. But what I was concerned, honestly, in a very, very, as a person who was reporting, from the first day in the war in Kiev region, in Kharkiv region, in Odessa, coming from, Severodonetsk to return to Chernihiv, then to Bucha, being one of the first reporters also, because we were allowed a bit early also to come, and to seeing that with my colleagues, unfortunately at the early stage when the bodies were still there. And I'm always worried that these big crimes just becoming symbols. People, you say Bucha, but a lot of people don't understand what is it. And then also there are a couple of famous stories. And again, I don't want to, I apologize, and I don't want to undermine the tragedy of the kind of some, famous stories. So for instance, my colleague Angelina Karyakina is working on this documentary comparing the attacks on the maternity ward in Mariupol, in Grozny, in Aleppo. But people heard about Mariupol, it just happened. It's good that they heard about that.
And of course, film helps a lot.
There is a film which won Oscar, all this kind of thing. And there are some, but some just happen to be not that much in media. And I should also say, I wouldn't name the publication. For the first year, part of my job was to, let's say, let those stories be published in the Western media. And it was not always an easy process because, it's a complicated project. The quality is very high, it's verified, it's very neutral, it's very professional. But still, I remember how an editor said, but we already did a story about tortures in Izium. But we recorded up till now hundreds of tortures. It's always a different one. And I said yeah, but you did one initial story about, people coming in the day and somebody was told that there was tortures, but that's what the story you covered. But for them, it's kind of enough. And that was
the kidnapped children as well. It's they're still kidnapped. It's still an outrage of historic proportions. Almost there's no end to the stories that ought to be run morally, but that's not how editors think, I guess.
Yeah, and also the paradox, and we know we're cooperating with lawyers, then in law, the more evidence you have, the more similar crimes are, the more often they happen, the more solid is evidence to build a case. In journalism, right the opposite. The more similar are incidents, the more often they happen, less chances to be published. So that's why I was thinking okay, I also had this feeling that also, to be honest, which was also my kind of pain, because we reported, what's happening in Crimea and the Donbass for all the years before 2022, up to 2014. And I'm okay with unpopular stories. Not every journalist is ready to do that. Some people don't like it. If your story don't travel, you discourage. Still, I always felt that like there is this demand for more horrible story, more horrible story. After the first days of invasion, I was writing daily to a number of publications. I still don't understand how I can file like 3 stories per day or something. But I remember it was like this spiral, then like every next story should be more horrible. And I wanted to stop it. I was like yelling at the editor saying like, no, it's bad enough. Like I don't want to say that like what is happening in Kiev and Mariupol is worse. What is worse, Mariupol or Bucha? And if it's like, should that be, like really this extreme case of like mass rape to shock the people? It's bad enough. So saying all that, I'm in particularly, like let's say, let me use the term like satisfied that at heart of this play, there is a story of the man from Stoyanka, Kiev region. Like it's close to Bucha. It's really where the people were, it's famous for the case that a lot of people were shot while trying to escape in their cars. But also he has a very strong story. But he's one of hundreds. And it's not like the ones which every media quoted, which was at New York Times or elsewhere. And that is for me today probably the most like satisfying thing, that like there are those stories which if there is no display, they probably would be, like they'll be somewhere. They would be in some report, in our archive, maybe in the story. But there is something about this very regular man, I'm not saying usual, I'm saying regular, because he's extraordinary. Obviously, everybody who'll come and see the play will see that it's an extraordinary story. So what I feel very strong about this play is that the team managed to preserve, and for me those like stories, common stories of the common people, told from it's such a support for them that you don't need to really like choose the most prominent, the most horrific, because everybody deserves, like to be heard in this regard, and you then understand how extraordinary this story is. Unfortunate, but extraordinary.
And is there an element that it's therapeutic in some ways for the victims to have their story told and heard and repeated? I asked this question in the full knowledge that I've sat with actually an extraordinary group of women, and it was near Bucha in the suburb. Women in their sort of 70s, 80s, 90s, and they're sewing camouflage netting in one of these palaces of culture. And they get together 6 days out of every 7. And they do this from morning till the mid-afternoon. But at the same time, when they're having their coffee break, they'll share stories about what's going on and their relatives at the front. And then maybe every couple of weeks, they will reshare the stories of occupation. They'll have heard them many, many times, but there's something therapeutic, I think, in the way they do that.
Absolutely, because we never talk to the people who don't want to speak. If not, we never insist. So we talk to the people who are ready to share their story, and it's not easy for many people. Yet, but my experience today, a humble one, that still that really it's about a space, creating a space, a very safe space. We were also taught how to do that so the people can tell it. I strongly believe that telling the story helps, mainly because you kind of give it away. I usually use this metaphor for, like when I'm teaching, when I'm speaking, that like I had the feeling that it's like the cloud of pain which lives in you somewhere in your head, which is bothering you, and it makes sense to create this coherent piece out of that pain, out of that horrible experience, which helps to make it structural. It shouldn't be rationalized, because there is nothing rational about such atrocities, but it also creates this feeling of distance, let's say, like that you are now not the victim, you are a observer, you are somebody's telling your story. And maybe it's not about display, but I remember very well, I was also helped me a lot to understand this role of storytelling. I heard Salman Rushdie at one of the panels. We were at the same festival together, literature festival, and he really was telling the story how he wrote the book about his assassination, and that he didn't provide a name to a perpetrator. He called him like those who assassinated him, and he said like, now I'm not his victim. He's just a character of my book. It was fascinating because now that's what also I'm kind of borrowed this, metaphor, because I think we also think like, we call the people we talk not victims but survivors. Technically, they are victims in the court case, so that can be also the term to be used. But I'm saying that like now, it's not they're just the victims of the Russian soldiers. We make the Russian soldiers the characters, and often, to be honest, very bad characters, villains in their stories, in the way how they tell the stories. They're protagonists who telling the stories when the Russians are villains. So I think like this storytelling helps to turn the tables, change the roles.
Take control, as it were, of the narrative. Yes.
And take control, obviously, take control of the narrative, yes.
And that brings me on to sort of one of the more longer-term questions, because it seems to me that the struggle for truth-telling, the struggle for objectivity, which is ongoing in all media, but in Ukraine that struggle was already very deep by the time of the full-scale war. How important is it that, let's say, oligarchic influence, control, extreme partisanship, that the battle had already been started against these things to create a free and independent media in Ukraine prior to full-scale invasion?
So two thoughts. First of all, I think in particular with the war crimes documentation, even when we don't speak about independent media, I felt that like because especially after 2014, the Russians were always trying to say, like a different version of the story, and partially it was successfully globally. People were so afraid that again, we will repeat that again. We will again need to prove that, like it was Russians who occupied Crimea. It was not, like all these kind of basic things.
Like in Cherno's film, where people are confused that, Ukrainians are shelling themselves. I mean, some people on the ground actually are in that informational bubble, confused, and reality is no evidence, actually, to some people.
And I should also say, it's very painful to be denied to be a victim. I also feel myself. I usually don't speak about myself like that. But when I'm in kind of, let's say, more hostile kind of environment, let's say like that, globally or somewhere challenged by, like our work or what's happening in Ukraine, I really think like, I don't consider myself victim, but it's not up to you to deny me to have this right, because technically I am. Like my country is attacked. I have lost some people. I'm speaking like colleagues. I'm generally more like okay than most of the people, but in general, I felt like myself that it's painful. So for the person who really lived through these horrors, like even to be denied. I remember that very, very well, like when it just happened that the first article I wrote, I wrote one of the first articles on the full-scale invasion. It was for The Guardian, and I was supposed to file a different piece at night on the 23rd, 24th of February. And I filed a totally different piece, but then Putin said what he said, and we understood at like 4 a.m., 5 a.m. that war has started. I wrote to the editors like, I need to update it. And then I understood like it's totally irrelevant. I'll do something like right away. So I actually wrote my first piece like something like 7, 8 a.m. in the morning, and it was, I think it was on the Guardian cover next day, together with a portrait of the lady from Chuguyev, Kharkiv region, which was like in blood. Her face was in blood. And by chance, I understood that, from other interaction, that lady was a mother of the classmate of my former colleague. And I asked, like, can I follow up? I just want to understand what's happening with this lady. And this girl answered me and said, like, my mom is not in the kind of state to talk, because it's extremely painful, because this photo is all over the world. It's everywhere. But and I am bombarded with the like this kind of Russian propagandistic narrative. It's not true, it's all fake, but it's my mother, it's her, and she's like trying to prove that like it's me in blood. So I really say that because this risk was always there, and for many years we can speak about artificial famine of the 30s like Holodomor and all other atrocities for quite some time, as people from different countries as well. It's not just Ukraine. Ukrainians were kind of denied this right to be considered a victim, or we should be a perfect victim. Then, therefore, we really, felt, and I felt this urge of Ukrainians to tell the story that, that people know globally. So that's why I do think that there is kind of disproportionately more like documentation, the willingness to share, to change, to shape this kind of injustice. As it takes, and I think that the part, but you're absolutely right that what was different in 2022, there were always, Ukraine was not really ever a dictatorship up to 1991. It was still kind of this kind of democracy, fighting there, hunted by its past, hunted by the by those things. And we still had some independent media in the 90s, some of the independent medias in 2000 after the Orange Revolution. And also what happened in 2014 with the Euromaidan revolution, and particularly with the Revolution of Dignity, as I've been a co-founder of Hromadske. We also managed to escape from this dichotomy that you are either opposition media or like you regime media. So we created literally, Hromadske is a public broadcaster. Mm-hmm. It couldn't be then created within the framework of the Ukrainian law. Something which saying like we're serving the society. We're just providing the facts. We are, to extent it's neutral to the point of the, we are neutral to the facts. But, if crimes are committed, we see these are crimes. If people are beaten,
corruption is committed, then
we call it corruption.
Yes.
We cover it, yes, but it's not in favor for this or that political force. And then I felt like there was so little of us at that time in 2014. But we created, and despite the oligarchic media were preserved, by 2022 there were so many Ukrainian independent media capable to tell that story. They are still there. There are hundreds of them. Some are good, some are bad, some are poor, some can do the better quality journalism, some have a different tone, some can have different styles, some can work harder, some can provide, better things. Yet it's an environment. It's an environment, it's a particular system in place which you cannot just erase, because unfortunately we see in different countries you were able to erase that in Belarus, in Russia.
And there, of course, they were able to import their own propagandists from Moscow when some Belarusian journalists refused to go along with Lukashenko's regime after the protests.
I've been reporting the protests in Belarus in 2020 with a lot of hope. I do think that there is a limit to how much you can do when it's a kind of like a total authoritarian regime. The regime in Belarus probably should have been gone. So in a way, there is a limit you can much do. What happened to Belarus is really this: Russia literally occupied it and took it under control. I do think that there was a chance for Belarus, but there was a kind of a particular guarantee from the Kremlin, like, you do that. And in Belarus it succeeded also mainly because, to my mind, they didn't have a time to breathe. We Ukrainians has time to breathe, in 2000s with all the kind of our autocracy was interrupted many times by civil society, so it has been created and it was growing. And it was working, maybe there were different times, difficult times in 2000s, prior to the 2014. But at that time, things were established. It was very difficult already to destroy us. Yet in Belarus, it was easy to wipe them out because they never had a moment of breeze after 1994.
And the indigenous language had already eroded to such a point that it's not providing the resilience that the Ukrainian language provides.
I also should say that in our case, I think what is your, what people often consider your weakness is actually your strengths. A lot of foreign media are always portraying Ukraine as the, like divided. I would challenge that. I think that Ukraine is just extremely diverse, and it's normal and good. It's diverse in terms of the ethnicities, of political views. So even like, we never had a chance that there is somebody who can totally overtake the country. Or like one oligarch, like who owns Georgia today, for instance, or really like that.
Extraordinary portion. It's something like.
And in this regard, there was always a competition. Even like our radicals and extremists from different sides couldn't never really overtake the narrative. And it was always, but I think it became the strands that we never had that crazy security apparatus following one person who couldn't be challenged. There was even this kind of, there is this authoritarian, there is this term by Canadian scholar, kind of competitive authoritarianism. Mm-hmm. In Ukraine it was the case. Even oligarchs fought each other. So in a way, there was security service, there was police, there was something else, there were political parties. So in the end, this kind of pluralism and this kind of fact, it's like not pluralism, but this diversity of Ukraine.
Competition.
And really competition,
competition,
even competition for resources, which was nasty, made the case that our authoritarian kind of law enforcement were brutal, were stupid, committed a lot of horrible things before 2014, like they didn't become absolutely perfect, but they couldn't be that strong and hierarchical, like in Belarus and like in Russia.
So stability and instability seems fascinating to me, because not only does it seem to me that the Russian psyche tends towards prioritizing so-called security, even if that's illusory over freedom, Ukraine has a very high tolerance threshold for insecurity, but seems to put freedom above that. But then if you look at the Western approach and the multiple revolutions in Ukraine, I don't think there's a huge amount of concern in the West about those. It's not seen as destabilizing to the world order. And yet Western foreign policy seems to prioritize stability in Russia, even if it's the nastiest of dictators who is busy destabilizing world order. The perception is that actually an unstable Russia would be the most dangerous thing.
I'll definitely, of course, challenge that idea. First of all, today we can. I really always argue. Actually, security and freedoms goes together, because we can speak about like not some vague idea of security. We are secure in independent, non-occupied Ukraine. Stable occupation is horribly insecure. Where Russian is, it's insecure in Bucha. It was insecure in Mariupol. The crimes, the freedoms are not there, and so they're connected. We really need to guarantee security with and Ukrainian armed forces are guaranteeing that security for us. Then we can have freedoms, and so we really understand that authoritarian governments, it's not secure. You are not secure as a human being. You better have kind of like a messy democracy, but you know that you won't be taken out of street, you won't be like detained, you won't be tortured. There is always something can happen, but you won't be at extreme. So, Russia is one of the most insecure places today globally. It's huge, and actually it's so huge. Yet I don't believe in that the problem that unstable Russia is it's a bigger issue. I was recently in Syria, and what I should say, as actually some people would say, like, can we fear the worst? You know what was the worst in Syria? Because this sadistic regime, it has been, the whole state worked for that. Like security apparatus, military, bureaucracy. Like the biggest, the state always the biggest. There is no one rebel group, terrorist organization, or anybody who can be as powerful and as big as a state controlling and enforcing. So what was happening in Syria, it was like that atrocities were committed by state. So even if you think about worst case scenario everywhere, nobody else as Bashar Assad regime would be capable to control and to enforce that scale, because scale comes with the state. The same is with Russia. In particular because Putin was building his, hierarchy and his rule for many, many years. It's firm. That's why people follow him. They're afraid of him. All the different, security forces, all kind of intelligences, army, police, riot police, and all other people around. So I think there won't be anybody else, because it took him 25 years to build this personal cult, which is built on fear, but fear of his might, his personal control over a lot of institutions. There is nobody who can enable that level of control over the country, meaning that there won't be nobody able of create this type of the large scale operations to run the whole army which commits war crime, because one thing, if you have a rebel group or terrorist group or wherever who commits crime, and it's always use the scale, 200 people, 300 people, a few thousand of people, okay, 10,000 people. You have millions of people, the Russian army, it's millions of people, and it's very toxic in a way, because the war crimes today, we can say it's a tool how the Russia is waging this war. It's not a normal army, but it's an army. So I do think that, in fact, the fact that this is a state, so I even think look, wherever you think the Soviet Union has fallen, nothing happened. In the end, Chernobyl happened. In the Soviet Union, with cover-up. Not after. With all the chaos of the early 90s. There was no kind of nuclear disasters just because, countries were poorly managed. Yes, there were things. There were wrong, organized crime, wherever you're thinking. But the level, so that's why I'm kind of arguing that and summarizing that actually freedoms, that security, for me, they're going hand in hand, first of all, and democracy is more secure. In fact, authoritarian regime is where you feel the most vulnerable. I've been reporting from Crimea. I know, you're naked. You know that it's an imminent, permanent danger. Every second you are there. And that's exactly what's happening in the occupied territories, what was happening in the occupied territories, during the Russian invasion. So this dilemma is just wrong. The authoritarian regime do not bring security. They do not bring security. Sometimes maybe, but at the cost of many lives and insecurity of many, many others.
And the last question to end on, what can Western media, indeed those who are trying to uphold sort of democracy and a plurality of opinion, what can we learn, one, from Ukraine's successful attempt to create a new media environment, a genuinely pluralistic and independent one that you described, and what can we learn from the first years of Putin's takeover in Russia, where he co-opted the media and where up to 80% or more of journalists decided to stay and actually collaborate with the regime?
We here in the UK, I think that the model of the public broadcaster is a really pivotal to preserving the pluralistic and normal society, not polarized society, because I would insist that the commercial model of the media, if there is an absence of proper public broadcaster, which serving the whole population, that's where you don't have good public broadcasters. You really have complicated democracies, and you have a huge polarization.
Like in Poland, for instance, with swings between one party
yes,
and the other.
Yes, because it was also overtaken, and it was still in the. I would at this time compare Nordic countries with Southern Europe. There are a lot of reasons, but in fact, in the Nordic states, the public broadcasters are dominant. They are the ones where, so there is some kind of shared idea of society, shared idea of the truth, shared idea of what is public good. You know, you can disagree. They still have elections. Parties are changing each other. So this idea that there should be some common interest, that it's not a competition, because I'm also very cautious about like the idea of just independent model of journalism, which is dependent on the donations. Because the risk is you're creating own bubble, and then you need to become even more extreme, you know, like you really like, you know, what we're saying, like, you know, like the Trump is good for New York Times because people are gathering around, but nobody else is reading them. It's not exactly like Times are so big and, you know, like they can even to some extent maybe compare to some idea of the public broadcaster. They're like just too broad not to be considered. But I think that the public broadcasters, just like regional media, and I do think that there is a need to support investigative reporting. You won't, not just investigative reporting, you know, like human rights reporting. You can't really sell that. You know, like how are you supposed? I'm now in a better position as a manager working with a public interest journalism lab within the Reckoning project as well, compared how I used to run independent media. Mainly because I don't need to prove that like I need to sell those stories, you know, like because I really know that there won't be advertisers to come to our work. What the hell? What advertiser would like to be an advertiser and sponsor for the war crime stories? People don't want to associate themselves. So I think like for human rights journalism, and the other thing is I do think that I don't envy people who work in the internet newsfeed today, because we now live in a very also dangerous moment for Ukraine, let's say like that. It's not never easy, but meaning like, so for instance, like now we're in the process of kind of so-called negotiations, but it's a simulation. They're not happening.
It's fake.
It's fake. It's a simulation, you know, like there is something written on Truth Social, but it's not happening on the ground. The war is still ongoing. The situation in the battlefield is hard. The Russia is today. And you know, like Russia, this moment, we're speaking early June. It's unfolding the full scale, very intense summer campaign, military campaign. It's very usual, you know, like this summer is better for military actions because there are greens, there are other things, there is nature.
Mud, etc.
So everywhere now in Ukraine, there is a new huge assault. It's extremely intense. Hasn't changed much in terms of the, you know, situation in the battlefield since the elections of the American president, Donald Trump. But things have changed. So, you know, like it's more like it didn't become less intense. It actually was always intense. But, you know, like, but the discourse globally in the mainstream media is as if the war would be over soon. And it creates this kind of like an opportunity to withdraw.
As if when the war's over, normality will resume as if by magic. And both of those are fantastical.
So yeah, so in a way, so I think that for us, it's very important for the media, you know, serve the public good, but also kind of understand what is real, what is fictional. And if something is not happening, you know, how much, I know you cannot not, you know, we Ukrainian media, we cannot not report on these negotiations. We have to, but it's about the balance. You can create a totally fictional environment, you know, like reality in which there are some people somewhere in Riyadh talking as if the war would be tomorrow. We know it's not there. So I think that, and I think for the global media as well, is just to understand what is happening, what is not happening. You know, like there are threats, like tariffs, whatsoever, but there are real things. So I think like to be more grounded, to take care about the region, to have the shared space of the shared truth, shared data, shared facts, that would be really, 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 really important. And again, like, yes, media should earn money, but you know, you do it that way. Your sport channel brings money and you do human rights reporting. But you can't expect like public service media, you know, bring money easily. So I do think, as in the modern way, and I think it was Walter Cronkite. It was Walter Cronkite at the 80s when he was living CBS, I think he used to work on CBS. I remember, as if I'm not American to remember, but he worked in one of the leading American publications, and he left. And when he was leaving, when I read his memoirs, he really insisted that, like the media could be also, probably supported as the healthcare, as education, as the theater, as a ballet, as some kind of it's public good. So there should be some more support. And if everybody speak about the danger of information today, everybody's speaking about that. People from security, people from defense, people from business. Let's agree that you need to strengthen kind of those which safeguard this informational space, because it's disproportional within the world. There are enough money in journalism. We still complain that there are no money for journalism, while everybody speak about the dangers from information, AI, whatsoever. So investing into journalism as thinking about the public good, that would be also very critical to preserve. I don't see the other way.
And have a debate about what's working, what isn't, and a public debate about what kind of media we want to see, and that is, I think, largely absent here from my perception. But in Ukraine that is actively discussed, and thank goodness. I think hopefully we can learn and import some of those innovations and experiments that have happened in Ukraine. That's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much for speaking, and the rain held off, which I'm very grateful for. And I will tell the audience about the play this evening and the impressions from that as well. But thank you for your work.
Thank you.